Alrighty. Well, good morning, everybody on the West Coast. Still good morning on the East Coast too. Look at that; it's super early that we're doing this. My name is Matt. Good to see everyone on what's going to be a very fun week. But before we get into all that craziness, want to talk a little about events. Corey McCarthy, CMO at Socio, joining me this morning to talk about less what's happened with events this year, because I feel like we've covered that a lot, Corey. But I want to talk about events in 2021 because hopefully we've learned some things and we have a sense for at least how we're going to try to do events next year. It could very well be that things like this are part of events, just spontaneously turning on a camera and saying who's on LinkedIn that wants to listen to us prattle on about things. But I think it's going to look a lot different than it did in obviously 2019. I think there's a bit of a settling we're going to get into that is going to have some longevity. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today, just for the next few minutes. But maybe, Corey, start with just introducing yourself, your background, and maybe a little bit about Socio, and then a little bit about the hackathons you guys did very, very early this year to really sort of help guide the industry on rethinking events.
Yeah, absolutely. And hi, and thank you so much for having me, Matt. My name is Corey McCarthy. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Socio. Socio is an end-to-end technology platform. When I started Socio back in January, it was a mobile app with really great plans and an awesome roadmap that really got accelerated this year. My background is in publishing. I used to run a magazine for one of the Penton Media brands. And so I've spent a long time in digital marketing, analog, print magazines, and then also a lot of time in events. So I have an understanding for what is broken, what technology does and doesn't exist. And that's why I originally kind of got excited about Socio. But with that industry background, when everything had, in February, I made a trip over to Indianapolis to visit with my team for the second time. And that was February 10th. And even at that point, San Francisco, the airport, everybody was really looking at each other sideways if you coughed or sneezed. And so having been in events for such a long time, I could tell that this was going to be a real issue because it's hard enough to get people to come to an event in the best of times, let alone, in a pandemic. So I showed up, the crazy Californians, saying that we needed to start talking about hybrid events. And so very quickly, I was not crazy anymore, and they started to listen. And we did a couple of really major pivots. So going into April, we had a really aggressive roadmap to bring everything virtual to support our existing clients. And one of the things that we quickly discovered is more than half of our clients had never produced a virtual event before. So with my background in publishing, I really wanted to put together an industry event, not necessarily something to, sell Socio, but host an industry event. So we put together the very first hackathon, which you were a part of and on the winning team for. So it was, it was amazing to pull together that many industry thought leaders. And what's really cool about what's going on right now is everyone is doing such a good job working together. There isn't, this competitive, mindset. Everyone is really trying to figure it out. And so that's been really great to see. After we did the first event hack, it's so funny looking back on that early days because we all, went in thinking it was just going to be a week or two and then maybe a month. And here we are. And because we don't have it figured out and we start kind of glitching and thinking that, maybe we can go back to in person, the topic has turned to hybrid. Yeah. I know that a lot of people have attempted to pull off hybrid events. It'll be interesting in the next couple of months to see where that goes. But there are a number of very large organizations that I've been speaking with that have canceled their big events in 2021. So I think that if we are going to go back live, it's going to be smaller hub and spoke or regional events that we're going to be seeing a lot of. And I think that digital and virtual events will reign. And I think that it's also, kind of cool because it's a sustainable way forward and a sustainable part of our businesses, I think, as we look 2021 and beyond.
Yeah, so a couple things there. One, kudos to you guys for just jumping on that hackathon opportunity early. And I think it was an honor to be a part of it. It was quite intimidating, I will tell you, Corey, because I'm a pipeline guy and I joined a bunch of seasoned, successful event professionals. And they were amazing. And so and what was interesting is, you got to remember, it's hard to remember now, but back at the end of March, the sky was falling. There was a period where we were legit wondering if it was ethical to sell. Like, do we just tell sales teams to shut it down for a minute, right? In the midst of that, all these events are canceled. You've got people that their entire job is planning events, and the events all got canceled. That was a celebration. I mean, it was clearly like it was a celebration of the craft. It was a celebration of the opportunity and the energy in that moment. I was just blown away by, and the creativity of the ideas. And maybe we'll need to figure out like how to actually put some of the output from the event into the stream here. But it was phenomenal, right? I mean, and I know you guys have done a handful of these now. You did the hybrid games afterwards as sort of an encore. And, relative to this question of how we're thinking about events for 2021, I agree with you. I think in-person events are going to come back. It may be another 9 or 12 months. We may be getting into cars before we get on airplanes en masse. So it may be the local events are maybe more likely to show up more rapidly. But I think in the spirit of your hackathons, I think that this is going to be something we continue to sort of evolve and figure out together. In the spirit of that, we have kicked off sort of this, State of Events 2021 research. I'm going to put a link here in the comments and would love to get anyone who is anywhere involved in the event space, to tell us what you think and tell us what you're thinking about events going into next year. And, one of the themes we've certainly seen, no matter when in-person events come back, Corey, is that it's not going to be an either or. It's going to be an and. I think a lot of in-person events are going to have an online component and vice versa. And the connective tissue between those events is going to be critical. Can you talk about what, whether it's community or whether it's just social engagement, combination of those things? What are some of the keys that are going to make those hybrid events more successful moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we need to go back to our strategy and go back to our event design, because when we take a look at what works virtually and what works in person, we really need to find what works for both. Mm-hmm. And you really need to have that platform that strings it together. So for the online attendees, you really need to have some way for them to connect with, meet, and see who is attending in person and vice versa. Because not everybody's going to feel comfortable getting on a plane or, going ahead and getting vaccinated this year. So we're going to have, I think, this a couple of years of blended experiences where it's going to be very important that we take a look at what we're trying to accomplish with having an event. And for most marketers, it's really activating your prospect base, keeping in touch with your customer base and making them more loyal and more fond of your particular brand. So I think that community is going to be a really strong part of how this is all stitched together, because it becomes the backbone. And I think one of the things that we can't continue to do is host these 3 to 5 day, 9-hour days back to back to back. That doesn't work in a virtual world.
Right.
What does work is if you break up the content, and rather than shoving it into 1 week like you would have originally, really rethink the experience and really rethink that attendee journey. And maybe it's stretched out over a series. So the Event Hack Hybrid Games that we did is actually a 10-week series. It's still going on. And, it's been great because we've been able to take bitty bits of the event world, for instance, networking, sponsorship, engagement, and really deep dive on those topics. And so for those people that care about those topics, you can actually go deeper in. I think that the learnings are better because you're not flooded with so much content that you actually walk away with more valuable content that you can put into action that day. And then, kick it forward a week or 2 weeks, you get to layer on more great content and more great ideas that you get to let sit and really, settle in and allow you to use in your everyday practice. So you're continually evolving yourself, I think, in a little bit more sustainable way as well.
It really kind of begs the question, like, what is an event? At what point are these no longer events? And is it just content? And maybe they're all part of the same thing, right? I mean, there's value, obviously, in, getting people together and having a sort of a focused amount of time to think about something, getting people that have a vested interest together in something and having them learn from each other, meet each other, connect with each other. But I think, when we're thinking about those online events, you're right. I mean, we continue to see companies and event producers put on these, what would have been an intensive 2 or 3 day event, and try to do it online. And I'm sorry, when my kids are doing homeschool right over there, and when I've got I'm not leaving my office, so I'm not leaving my work day, doing that level of intensity doesn't make as much sense. The hybrid games have been fun to watch because it is kind of spread out over a long period of time. I don't know whether to call that an event or just a really smart sort of serialized sort of content strategy. And maybe it's a little bit of both. And as we think about 2021, I wonder if the difference matters, because at the end of the day, it's not about putting on an event. Like, what's the objectives behind the event? Like, your objective in doing an event in Las Vegas in May was not to do an event in Las Vegas. You had some business objectives behind that, and those business objectives could be manifested in a variety of different ways. So how do we think about that from an event standpoint, and how events then fit into the broader ecosystem of marketing strategies into 2021?
So organizers are going to host events for two reasons. Either that's their single source of revenue, or that's their lead generation mechanism. So when you take a look at why we host events, I think that that's the most important. And I think that that's the point that you need to reverse engineer and figure out your strategy from. There are two reasons that people come to events. They come to events to see the speakers talk on specific pieces of content, and they come to network. So how can we put really great content and really great speakers together and the opportunity to network? And I think if the networking isn't there, then it's a webinar and it's top down and it's not quite as engaging. And if you take a look at why you go, nobody goes to an event to be sold. That's part of the reason why I did the event Hack Hybrid Games is an industry event. Nobody wants to be sold ever. So if you put it into a package where people have a takeaway and there's a win-win, I think that that's when it starts to matter. And that's when it does start to bleed into content and thought leadership. So, why are you going to attract people to your event, to your brand? Why does your brand matter? How do you make people feel comfortable and welcome within that ecosystem? And how do you keep people talking, meeting each other, and engaging? So within the event platforms that we have today, all of a sudden they're on the desktop. There's a chat function, there's a question and answer function, there's a polling function. And so you can have that level of engagement that you typically would with an event that is a point of differentiation between just a simple webinar. But in the chat, it's a really great thing to be able to meet one another. In the app version and on the roadmap, we actually do have a version of the web app where you can get in and actually meet and chat with each other one-on-one. And so if somebody pops up in the chat, has a really great thought, you can click on their name. It'll, in future iterations, take you into their profile. It already does that on our mobile app. But once you get into the profile, it can, you can request a meeting, you can request a connection with them, you can chat one-on-one, you can go, to their LinkedIn, connect with them on LinkedIn as well. And so you're still meeting a lot of people. And, to be honest, in the chat, that's the way I've met a lot of people. And, take a look at our CMO coffee talks. I've met a number of people in chat that I've reached out to, have reached out to me on LinkedIn, and we've and had conversations afterwards. And so I think that networking is still happening. There's still great value in that, but you have to have an event that's set up on a platform that is able to accomplish all of that for you while giving the content, while, having that in-person, experience blended back to that virtual experience pretty seamlessly.
No, it's interesting you bring up the example of the CMO Coffee Talk event, because I think you're right. I mean, the connections that have happened even just with DMs in the Zoom chat, and in some cases, for some reason, especially the Pacific time zone version that we do, the chat just blows up, right? I mean, you've got people connecting with each other. There's sort of occasional snarky, friendly comments to each other. I mean, it's a lot of fun. And I think that if you think about if I look at the satisfaction ratings of events, people want good content, they want good speakers, but the less you program, sometimes the better the event is perceived, because people want more time with each other. They want longer breaks between sessions so that they can actually spend more time in the hallways. They want birds of a feather events so that they can find small groups, and even the introverts can kind of find people that they want to meet. And so I think that is missing from not just online events, but missing from just online components of events. And I think that, to be able to use that as part of your 2021 strategy, to really think about, okay, whether we do this virtually, whether we do this in person, whether we do this as a hybrid, driving that level of connectivity, driving that audience engagement, that is it's no longer an option. That has to be table stakes for a great event moving forward. We have a couple questions. So we got a bunch of people that are watching this, which is really awesome. We're going to have this available on demand, obviously, but a lot of people watching live. I mentioned early on, if you have a question for Corey, you can throw it up here. I was not kidding. Rahul has a question for you. And he said he addressed this question to me, but this is not a question for me. This is a question for you. Will virtual events lose their charm once we go back to normal? So once we have the ability to go back and do events like we did a year ago, will there be less virtual events, or are we seeing sort of an evolution of a greater sustainable hybrid model for events?
Yeah, I think that they'll continue to evolve. I think that they'll be different than what they are now. We can't continue to do them as is. In the event hack that we produced last week, there was a really great quote that there is Zoom fatigue, but you have never heard anyone talk about ESPN fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, virtual events are going to start to go the way of television, and you're going to see more thought put into the storytelling that really threads all the way through, which is truly a marketer's job. And so I think that we're going to continue to evolve what a virtual event looks like. I think that we're going to find out how to run hybrid events, because really there are a couple of industry leaders that have been looking for people that have done a killer hybrid event, and we're still early days. And so I think that there's a lot of innovation that still needs to happen there. But cost-conscious CEOs are going to start taking a look at their travel budgets, whether they need to fly someplace, whether they need to actually attend something in person. And so I think that now that the lid has been taken off virtual events, it's here to stay. I think it'll continue to evolve, and I'm not sure what it's going to look like exactly, going into 2022, but I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon.
Well, and you bring up the question of budgets. A lot of money has gone into historically getting people to events and the physical structure of events. And if you're producing an event, doing an actual CMO breakfast requires travel. It requires bacon. It requires a room to give people the bacon. If you do an online version of that, like Coffee Talks, like technically it's just Zoom. But I could argue that Zoom is a pretty terrible tool to actually drive audience engagement versus just a chat, right? And so, what are some of the components that you think people are going to need to do successful events in 2021 and beyond? Let's assume 2021 is a wash for live events. Let's assume maybe you do a couple small events second half of the year, but the big event expenditures are really kind of going to have to wait another year. What are investments people should think about now in Q4, which you could think of as Q0 for 2021? What components should people be thinking about investing to get ROI from their new event strategy?
So organizers spend so much time putting an event into the ether that you do such a great job of generating the attendees, the leads. It really needs to live somewhere, and not just once, but repeatedly. And so I do think that finding an event platform is the way to go, especially something that does have a community feature. And I think that we're sitting at a really great time right now. When we take a look at our marketing plans, what does our content strategy look like? What does our event strategy look like? How are we going to push it? What is the cadence? What is the frequency? What is the consistency? And really kind of build that into the way we think about 2021. One of the pieces of feedback that we've heard is, because we have the Event Hack hybrid games every single Thursday at 1:00, Eastern Standard Time, people look forward to it. It's a moment of delight. It's, already earmarked in people's calendars. And so people look forward to it. And so what can you provide as a brand or an event to keep that continual engagement going? People have been talking about doing Walking Wednesdays, where instead of being on camera, it's a podcast. And so everybody listens to the podcast while they walk around their neighborhood. And maybe there's gamification where you can, have a contest with how many steps people take, during the podcast. But it's mixed media. And so I think that it's one of the most important things that you can do right now is set yourself up with the right technology that will help do little bits of all of the moving pieces that are going into virtual and hybrid events together.
Yeah, I love it. One thing, so we're about almost 20 minutes in, and we haven't really talked about how sales integrates with this. And I think with a lot of live events, sales really misses face-to-face interaction with their prospects. They miss the casual time at the happy hour or at the bar, just building relationships. How do you get sales integrated into an event structure like we're facing now in a hybrid model? I mean, is there a way that we're teaching salespeople how to engage in some of the community engagement elements that are available? And what are some of your best practices for getting sales engaged and helping them build value in a virtual format?
Yeah, absolutely. In the salespeople in a community, I get kind of picky about, to be honest with you. And I'm still searching for best practice for that particular use case because,
Yeah.
again, in a community, that's supposed to be a safe haven where people go to share and collaborate. And as soon as you get a whiff of a salesperson in there, I think that that would quickly shut it down. I think that the way to go is to really instill this idea of thought leadership in the entire sales force. I think that that as a sales strategy has always been very successful and is even more true now. I think that having the salespeople, take a look at the attendee list, and if you're sponsoring an event, do the same thing that you would normally do. A lot of these events are having, booths with breakout sessions that
Mhm.
honestly nobody's showing up to unless you invite them.
Right.
And so it goes back to basics. It goes back to the old principles that we were using before. Those still very much ring true. Before an event, make sure that you're inviting people to come. When you're at an event, take a look at the chat. The people who are most vocal in the chat are probably the people who are in your buying window. Go take a look at them, meet them actually in the app, or send them a note outside on LinkedIn to try to see, if you can make a connection and, authentically call out something that they brought up in the chat in the event that you guys were in to, layer in that common bond that you guys have. So I think that we do such a great job of bringing virtual attendees to the table. I think that that's a great list to give to a BDR, SDR team to supplement any sort of marketing efforts for those and continually activate and engage them. Talk about funnel content marketing. What is your marketing automation strategy from there? How are you going to continue to keep these people activated and push them through the funnel?
Yep. Well, let's wrap this up. Let's talk about the research that we're doing together. I put a link into the comments here so people can check that out. We're in info capture mode. So if you are still listening, that means you are interested in B2B events. You are interested in what's going to happen to events in 2021, which means by definition, we want your input. We want to know how you're thinking about events for 2021. We want to know how you're planning for it, how you're budgeting for it. And we're really excited to get these results out and to share with them. Talk a little bit about this research and what you're, Corey, hoping to get out of this and to learn, just in terms of your event, selfishly, your event strategy, but also, for Socio moving forward.
This is an industry research project. I want to figure out how marketers specifically are approaching events this year. What are you looking for? What are the pain points? I'm in the great position that Socio is able to solve for a lot of these things. And so a lot of the details we're going to take back and put into our roadmap. So how much should we be investing in some of the online virtual tools? What do you really need? Is an elevated, green room speaker experience? What are those things that are missing right now that you're looking for? Because as an industry, I think it's important to understand what each other, how each other are thinking about moving forward. How much budget are you putting into it? Are you going to do virtual events? Are you going to be brave and go into the hybrid event world? Are you going to be even more brave and do live events? I think it's, really telling to see where we're at as an industry and, inspire each other to think differently right now.
I love it. Well, Corey McCarthy, CMO at Socio, this has been fun. I think we've covered a little bit of interesting ground and looking at next year. I don't think any of us have a crystal ball and where the macro elements are going to impact us. But one of the silver linings for me this year has been some of this exponential learning that we've had, like, ripping the Band-Aid off of certain things that we've considered status quo and saying, okay, we're no longer going to be bold and say we're not going to go to events. We're just going to be barred from going to events. So what do we do now? And so I think a lot of learning, a lot of good best practices. Just kudos to you and your team. It's just I've had the pleasure of working with you, but also with your team who's been producing some of this great content and events. And just thanks for all that you've done for the event community, and for those of you watching and listening, both live and on demand. We definitely want your input. So take advantage of getting your input into that survey. Everyone that fills out a survey will be some of the first to get the results once we get them published as well, and some of the first to learn what everyone's thinking moving forward. So, Corey, thanks so much for doing this.
Matt, thank you for having me.
All right, kids. Well, thanks very much for watching. Have a good rest of your week. Take care.